So this evening, I shall continue to discuss the noble truth of the cause of suffering, or samudaya satya. So there are three kinds of tanha, or craving, or kama tanha, craving for desirable objects, bhava tanha, craving associated with the eternity view. In Pali is known as sasata ditti, and craving is associated with the view of annihilations, uceta ditti. So as long as one has not yet realized the true natures of mental and physical phenomena through the practice of mindfulness meditation, vipassana meditation, one may not be able to overcome the view of eternity and the view of annihilations. So during the practice of vipassana meditation, meditators may be able to overcome these two kinds of extreme wrong views during the practice. But meditators must be able to attain deep concentration. In other words, they have to attain momentary concentrations, in other words, kanika samadhi or vipassana samadhi. So if meditators aspire to attain momentary concentrations, then they have to put forth effort to develop mindfulness from one moment to next moment without much interruptions. So when mindfulness meditators are able to attain deep concentration, first of all, they would realize the specific characteristics, or in other words, the individual's characteristics of mental and physical phenomena. For example, when mindfulness meditators are mindful and note the movements of the abdomen, rising, falling, as they really occur. If the mindfulness is attentive and precise and energetic, meditators would be able to realize or to experience the movements clearly. So when there's deep concentration, meditators realize through their personal experience there's a process of rising movements, there's a process of falling movements. And at the same time, there's a process of mindfulness, of the noting mind, that mindful and notes the process of rising or the process of falling. So at each moment, meditators realize there are two processes. One is the object, for example, the process of rising movements. The other is a mental process. There's a mental state or mental process of mindfulness or the noting mind. So as each movement, there's a pair of processes. There's nothing else. When meditators are mindful of other objects or phenomena, meditators also realize that at each movement there's a pair of processes. For example, when there's a pain, then there's another mental process of mindfulness or the noting mind that notes the pain. Sometimes meditators could not perceive the location of pain. In fact, the location of the pain is not important. It's because pain is a sensation of feeling is a mental process. So when meditators mindful of a pain or any sensations, they should be mindful of that sensations precisely. They do not have to pay attention at which part of the body there's this pain or there's this numbness and so on. But at the beginning of the practice, if the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, meditators do know the location or the place of the pain and so on. But when the mindfulness and concentration are getting stronger, meditators realize through personal experience there's this pain which is an object. Then there's another mental process. There's a noting mind or mindfulness. So meditators realize at each movement there's a pair of processes. Apart from these pair of processes, meditators could not see other things. For example, a person or an eye. So at that times, meditators overcome the view of a person, a being, or an eye, or you. So at that time, meditators only realize a pair of processes. When the mindfulness and concentrations are getting stronger, then meditators could realize the relationship between the object and the mental process of the noting mind. So if they follow the guidelines of mindfulness meditation closely, then they begin to realize the relationship between the object and the mindfulness of the noting mind. They realize their relationship in terms of cause and effect. So for example, when there's a process of rising movements, then what will be arising at that moment? So when there's a process of rising movements, then there's a mental state of mindfulness, the noting mind arising. So that mindfulness arising because there's an object arising. When there's a falling movements appear, then the mindfulness of the noting mind will appear at that moment. If there's a thinking arising, then there's a process of mindfulness arising and becoming aware of that thinking mind. So meditators could see the relationship between the object and the noting mind in terms of cause and effect. So do you know which one is the cause, which one the effect? Which one is the cause? Is the object is the cause, or the noting mind is the cause? Object is the cause. The arising of the mindfulness or the noting mind is the effect. So that's why when meditators could not perceive movement of abdomens, they should not focus the mindfulness at the abdomen, because the object had disappeared, or meditators could not perceive any movements of rising or movement of falling, then they cannot keep the mindfulness at the abdomen. So they have to be mindful of other objects, for instance the sitting postures, then one clear touching points, the second touching points, and so on. If meditators follow the guidelines closely, then they will realize that they can mindful and note because there's object arising at that moment. If the object or the phenomenon doesn't arise, then there's no mindfulness or there's no awareness. So this point is very important. When the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, meditators could not see the arising of the mindfulness clearly. They could not realize the arising of the mindfulness almost at the same time with the arising of the object. Although we say that the object first the object arising, then the mindfulness will arise immediately, one after another. But sometimes both processes are arising so rapidly, it seems they are arising at the same moment. So meditators have to follow the guideline closely. So when the mindfulness and concentration are getting stronger, meditators could perceive that the mindfulness goes to the distinct object by itself. For example, when meditators are mindful of the process of rising or process falling during sitting meditation, if there's a strong pain arising and that pain is clearer than the movements of rising, then the mindfulness will move there, or the mindfulness goes to that strong pain by itself. So some meditators could realize from their personal experience, the mindfulness goes to the strongest object. If meditators' mind is not alert, they may not be able to see it clearly. Or if the meditators exercise control over the mindfulness, then the mindfulness is not active because the meditators exercise control over the process of mindfulness. For example, sometimes meditators mindful of the movements of rising or movement of falling. Then they know there's a thinking arising, yet they have the idea that the mindfulness still staying with the process rising or the process falling. But if a meditators are endowed with active mindfulness, at the moment of knowing there's a thinking, the mindfulness is no longer with the process of rising or with the process of falling. The mindfulness would notice or know there's a thinking immediately. If the mindfulness is a precise, thinking would disappear instantly. Then if the movements of rising is the clearest object, the mindfulness will appear there. So meditators realize that mindfulness is also a mental process. Mindfulness also has the characteristics of impermanent, anicca, unsatisfactory, dukkha, and anatta, no self or not self. So when meditators have attained deeper concentration, they will realize the arising of mindfulness clearly, almost at the same time with the arising of an object. Then, if the mindfulness is constant and continuous for longer and longer period of time, the meditators will be able to realize the intention before a process of movements. If meditators have not yet attained deep concentration, then it's difficult to realize there's an intention arising. Then there's a process of movements followed by a process of movements. For example, during walking meditations, if the mindfulness is sharp and concentration is deep enough, meditators would realize there's intention arising by itself. Then the process of lifting will appear immediately. So every process of movements is preceded by the intention. If there's no intention, then there's no movements. If there's no intention, then there's no actions. So in this experience, meditators come to realize the relationship between the mind and the actions or various processes of movements. So it's important to realize the intention clearly. Then meditators may make a mental noting intending. If the mental noting is quick enough, sometimes meditators realize there's intention to live, but they have not made any mental noting. The lifting movements arising immediately. Then they have to be mindful of the lifting movements immediately. So in this meditation, we always emphasize that meditators must be able to perceive the arising of the object then they can be mindful and know it. So sometimes some meditators could not understand clearly mindfulness meditation. Then they may just make a mental noting or intention lifting, intention pushing, intention dropping, touching, or intention pressing. So they could not see the intention, but merely say in your mind. In other words, mentally say it, intention, nearly start to move. Even though they could not perceive that mental self-intention, yet they make a mental noting intention. So in this way, this way of developing mindfulness is not correct, because meditators merely say it in the mind, but did not perceive the arising of that object. So in that way, sometimes we say that meditators only note it blindly. It's because they do not see the object, only mentally say it. So this is not mindfulness meditation. That noting is also not truthful. As you know, in meditations, mindfulness meditation, we want to realize the truth. The truth means you see it, you hear it. So similarly, in mindfulness meditation, meditators must see the arising of the object. Then they can mindful and know it. If they did not see the arising of the object, then they cannot mindful nor make any mental noting. So when meditators could realize the movements clearly, then they may be able to realize the intention before the process of movements. So when meditators could realize the intention clearly, then they come to realize the relationship between the mind and his actions or her actions. So I believe you know what's karma. So during the practice of mindfulness meditation, meditators also can experience the teaching of karma. As you know, karma is defined as cetana. The word cetana means mental volition or intention or motive. So cetana is karma. So in other words, volitional actions is karma. So meditators realize that every process movements is preceded by intention, and action also preceded by mental volitions. So at the time, meditators realize there's a series of relationship between the intention and the movements. When these movements is completed, there will be arising of another intention. Then there's another movements again, and so on. If meditators have not yet attained deep concentration, momentary concentration, then it's not possible to realize the intention clearly. So when meditators could realize the specific characteristics of the phenomena clearly, and the the arising of the object, or the relationship between the objects and the mindfulness, and the mind, the relationship between the mind or intention and the following process movements, then they only come to realize the three common characteristics of the mental and physical phenomena. In other words, meditators, you begin to realize anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So, when meditators realize the three common characteristics of mental and physical phenomena, they are also realizing the specific characteristics or the individual characteristics of the mental and physical phenomena at the same time. If meditators have not yet realized the specific characteristics of mental and physical phenomena, they would not see clearly the three common characteristics of mental and physical phenomena. So, with this realization through personal experience, the specific characteristics and the common characteristics of mental and physical phenomena, then what's the relationship between these realizations and the noble truth of the cause of suffering? The noble truth of the cause of suffering is tanha. So, as explained in the previous talk, tanha arises due to a cause. There's DT. That means the view of an entity, or there's a view of self or soul. So when there's a view of a being, a self or a soul, or in other words, atta, then one may think when a person or being pass away, what will happen to this atta? So something, this atta will take birth again. So this atta will take birth again and again. Or some may think this atta will be annihilated. There's no more birth at the end of one's life. So this view, these two types of wrong view, extreme wrong views, were very common during the Buddha's time. So some followers of other teachings think that there's atta. This atta is permanent and will transmigrate from one existence to another existence. Or as I explained in the previous talk, when this body had died, atta will look for another body. So some teachers use the simile of the house. When the old house is destroyed, then this atta will leave that old house and look for a new house. But in the teaching of Buddha, atta is a wrong view. So bhava tanha, craving associated with the eternal view. This bhava tanha is translated in some of the Dharma books as a craving for existence, or craving for existence associated with the view of eternity, sasataditi. But craving for existence, as I explained, is also something very desirable. For example, even those who are doing good deeds, in the process of accumulating merits, they may also make aspiration to be born wealthy, or to be born in the Deva world, and so on. So this is craving for something that they desire. So it also comes under the first kind of craving, kama tanha. So bhava tanha is craving associated with the view of eternity, sasataditi. So the followers of other teachings holds the view that this atta that cannot be destroyed. You transmigrate from this body to another body. When this atta transmigrates to another body, then there's beginning of another new life for that atta. But the other abstract wrong views is not vibhava tanha. So some books translated as a craving for non-existence, or craving for non-existence associated with the view of annihilation. But the meaning of vibhava tanha means craving associated with the view of annihilations. In other words, some followers of other teachings hold the view that this atta only lasts for one's life. At the end of one's life, everything will be annihilated. There's no more birth in the future. So those who follow the teachings of Buddha, very unlikely they have this wrong view. They always think that there's a rebirth. But if they could not understand the rebirth well, then they may think that there's a consciousness of the mind that will take birth again. They think this consciousness is something like permanent. You take birth again. So if they could not see clearly the arising and passing away the consciousness of the mind, then they may think there's a permanent mind. So it's important to realize the true natures of the mental and physical phenomena through the practice of mindfulness meditation or vipassana meditations. So when meditators have attained Khanika Samadhi or Vipassana Samadhi, then they would realize the true nature of mental and physical phenomena through personal experience. So, for example, when there's a sound or voice appear, then what will be arising at that moment? In one of the teachings of Buddha, Buddha also used this example. The examples of the eye, or the ear, the nose, and so on. So when there's a sound or the voice appear, then what will be arising at that time? So definitely there's a consciousness arising, or perceiving or sensing the sound or the noise. So which one is a cause, which one is an effect? The sound is a cause. The arising of the consciousness is an effect. Of course, there are other conditions. For example, there's a space so that the sound can travel to your ear door. If there's no space, then the sound would not be able to travel to ear door. And the ear also must be endowed with sensitivity. So when all these conditions are met, then you produce the effect, the arising of the hearing consciousness. Then what comes to perceive, or what comes to know? There's arising of the hearing consciousness. So, as you know, the mind or the thought process cannot perceive himself or herself, or as I explained in one of the talk, or just like the touchings of the fingertips. The fingertips cannot touch the very same fingertips. Similarly, a thought process, the arising, continuing and ceasing of the thought process, it cannot be known by the very same thought process, but it's being perceived by another thought process. So similarly, if meditators who have attained deep concentration, then they could perceive the arising of the consciousness. So in other words, there's another consciousness arising, perceive the hearing consciousness. In the ultimalities, there be arising of another consciousness, or in other words, awareness, perceive the hearing consciousness. So this hearing consciousness, which are the effect? Because there's a sound or the voice. The sound and the voice is a cause. Arising of this hearing consciousness is the effect. Then this effect becomes a cause. Then this produces another effect. There's arising of the awareness, another consciousness perceive the hearing consciousness. So meditators could realize that an effect can become a cause. That cause can produce another effect. And then the effect can also become a cause, produce another effect. So is the hearing consciousness permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent, arising and passing away very instantly. If the mindfulness is very sharp, then meditators also could mindful of the disappearance of the awareness. So when hearing consciousness had disappeared, then that awareness also had disappeared. Then do you think that everything will be stopped there? Nothing will be arising? So if the hearing consciousness had disappeared, the awareness also had disappeared, then if there's another cause arising, for example, a strong smell appears at the nose door. So when there's a strong smell appear at the nose door, then what will be arising? It will be arising of another consciousness. There will be another consciousness arising. So why this consciousness can arise? Why this consciousness can arise? Sensing or perceiving this smell. This consciousness that perceiving the smell can arise because the previous consciousness had disappeared. So the disappearance of the previous consciousness becomes a cause. Then the effect is arising of this smelling consciousness. If the previous consciousness did not disappear, then the next consciousness cannot arise. If an object that's arising at that present moment did not disappear, then the next object cannot arise. So if meditators want to realize this experience of Vipassana meditation, they have to develop sharp mindfulness and deep concentration in those Khanika Samadhi. So when meditators have attained Khanika Samadhi, at that moment the mind is purified from mental hindrances and defilements. There are 7 stages of purification. The first stage is not purification of morality. So when meditators could observe the precepts well, then they would gain purification of morality. Then based on purification of morality, they begin to meditate. For example, they begin to practice concentration meditation or Vipassana meditations. So during the practice of meditation, when the mind is free from hindrances and defilements, then meditators would attain purity of mind. So purification of mind is the second stage. But one who practices samatha meditation will not be able to attain the next purification or the third purification and onwards. So if one who practices samatha meditation wishes to attain the third purification, the fourth one, and so on, then the samatha meditators must be able to switch over to the practice of Vipassana meditation. In other words, by being mindful of all the mental and physical phenomena as they really occur. So when one has switched over to the practice of Vipassana meditation, then one will attain third purification, fourth purification, and so on. So the third purification is purification of view. In other words, one overcomes the wrong view when there's deep concentration. So mindful meditators, if they did not begin with the practice of samatha meditation, but they begin the practice by being mindful of all the mental and physical phenomena as they really are. In other words, they are practicing pure Vipassana meditation. So, if meditators practice pure Vipassana meditation, they also need to attain concentration before they can realize the third purifications, the fourth one, and so on. So, pure Vipassana meditators, like all the yogis here, they do not practice concentration meditation, but they need to be mindful of every object, every phenomenon that's arising at that present moment as it really occurs. So when the mindfulness becomes more and more constant, continuous, without much interruptions, and the practice is free from hindrances and defilements, then they would also attain purification of mind. So at the moment of attaining purification of mind, they begin to gain some Vipassana experience. For example, the purification of will, where meditators realize the specific characteristics or the individual characteristics of mental and physical phenomena clearly, and they realize there's a process of mindfulness or noting mind. So when meditators could realize the specific characteristics clearly, then they come to realize the common characteristics. They realize an object is arising and passing away very instantly. The mindfulness also arising almost at the same moment with the object. In other words, the arising of the mindfulness is dependent on the arising of an object or phenomenon. So when the object had disappeared, the mindfulness will also disappear. So this the meaning of conditioned phenomena. Any object that's arising dependent on something will not last long. It's not everlasting. So this is known as conditioned phenomena. So when meditators realize that everything arising due to various conditions, that this condition become a cause that produce the effect, then they also could realize the teachings of conditionality. So this teaching of conditionality is also one of the profound teachings. If one doesn't understand the teaching of conditionality, in other words, dependent origination, paticca samuppada, one cannot see the Dharma clearly. So in the scriptures say that one who sees dependent origination, one also see the Dharma. We cannot find this teaching of conditionality in other teachings. We can only find these teachings of conditionality and the teachings of anatta in the Buddha Sasana, in other words, the teaching of Buddha. So it's because other teachings could not understand about conditionality and anatta. So they may think there's a permanent atta. That permanent atta, you transmigrate from one existence to another existence. Or in other words, when this body had decayed, destroyed, or cannot use anymore, just like an old house, then atta will transmigrate to another body and so on. But one who has realized the teachings of Buddha, they will understand correctly there's no permanent atta. They will realize from the practice of Vipassana meditation clearly that they are only namarupa, mental and physical phenomena. These mental and physical phenomena are not permanent. They are arising and passing away very instantly. And they are arising is due to conditions. They cannot arise due to condition. So when meditators could see the arising of an object clearly, depending on the conditions, then he would gradually overcome the view of annihilation. It's because the view of annihilation say that atta only lasts for one existence. When a being has passed away, the atta or that being is annihilated completely. But one who could see the arising of the object clearly, depending on the condition, one would understand that the view of annihilation is wrong view. Then, similarly, when one could see the cessations clearly with the conditions, and then when there's another object arising, that object, that phenomenon is another new phenomenon. In that way, one would gradually overcome the view of eternity. The view of eternity says that there's a permanent atta that cannot be destroyed, that will take birth again and again. But one who has gained insight knowledge through personal experience, one will realize that every phenomenon that's arising is not permanent, subject to passing away. When there's another object arising, that object is another object, another new object or another new phenomenon. For example, when meditators mindful of pain, sometimes meditators mindful no pain, then pain disappeared. A few seconds later, or 15 or 20 seconds later, another painful sensation arising. Meditators may think the same pain comes back again. So do you think that is the same pain or the old pain reappear again, or is a new pain? Or sometimes meditators mindful of certain memory, they mindful note it, then that mental state of memory disappear. Later on, the same memory comes back again. They have the idea is the same memory, now come back again. But one who practices mindfulness meditation correctly, they will realize that there is no phenomenon, there is no phenomenon goes to another place. It disappears wherever it arises. So when meditators mindful of pain, sometimes meditators have gained some good mindfulness and concentration. They may experience the pain is moving from one place to another place. But actually, there's no pain moving from one place to another place. The painful sensation, where it arises, it will disappear at that very same place. So if meditators have not yet attained deep concentration, they will not be able to realize clearly. When this pain had disappeared in the previous moment, then if there's another pain arising in this present moment, actually this pain is a new phenomenon. When the pain that's arising at that present moment had disappeared, if there's another pain arising enough in the following moment, then that pain arising in the following moment is another new pain, is another new phenomenon. If meditators think this pain that arose and disappeared in the previous moment, and the pain that's arising at the present moment is the same pain, then they cannot be free from the view of eternity totally. If the pain that had disappeared at this present moment, then there's a pain arising in the subsequent moment. If the meditators think it's the same pain, then they are not yet totally free from the view of eternity. So meditators come to realize when they can see the arising of object clearly, when there's a condition, then they know the view of annihilation is not right. And then when they can see the cessation of the object with the cessation of conditions, then they know the view of eternity is also a wrong view. When they perceive the arising of the object, the next object is a new object, then they could break away from the view of eternity. So in that way, meditators come to realize the view of eternity is a wrong view. The view of annihilation is also a wrong view. So you may think, if there's no atta, then how does rebirth take place? How does rebirth take place? If there's no atta, then how does rebirth take place as taught by the Buddha? How does rebirth take place? If there's no atta, move over to next life, or there's no permanent consciousness that you move over to next life, then what's taking place in the process of rebirth? So, as you know, if there's rebirth, then definitely there's a consciousness arising. If this consciousness was the previous consciousness of the previous life, the previous existence, or is another new consciousness? So it's another new consciousness. So at the end of one's life, the last consciousness, the death consciousness, has passed away. If that consciousness did not pass away, the consciousness of rebirth or relinking consciousness cannot arise. So with the passing away of the last consciousness of previous existence, then there will be arising of a relinking consciousness or rebirth consciousness. So we say there's a beginning of another life. But why this rebirth consciousness or relinking consciousness can arise? It can arise because of tanha. If there's no tanha, then one would not take birth again. Tanha, craving to be born again in the human world, in the Deva world. So this craving can arise because of ignorance. Ignorance is not removed totally. So then where one will take rebirth? Where is one's destiny? So the other condition is the karma. Karma that determines the next destiny. So in other words, with the passing away of the last consciousness of previous life, then it's because of tanha, then there's a birth again, there's a rising of new consciousness. Then when one will take birth again, depending on the karma. So, in other words, there's no atta or a permanent entity that transmigrates to next life. If one who follow the teaching of Buddha think that there's a permanent consciousness or permanent mind, move over to next life, then this is wrong view. It's quite similar to the view of eternity. So one who practices the mindfulness meditation, when they have attained deep concentration and gains some experiences of Vipassana meditation, such as the cause and effect, the arising of the mind, or arising of the awareness and the object, or the mind, the relationship between the mind and the actions or movements, then they would be able to overcome the view of eternity. They realize the view of eternity and view of annihilation is because everything arising dependent on condition. Whatever arising dependent on condition is not permanent. When the condition cease, that phenomenon also cease. So this is important in the understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. There's the teaching of dependent origination. In fact, the teaching of Four Noble Truths also includes the teachings of dependent origination. So, as I mentioned in the previous talk, this four kind of Dharma is very profound. If one wishes to understand the teaching of Buddha well, they should learn it, and the most important is to understand it through the practice of Vipassana meditation. So these four profound Dharma, the Four Noble Truths, the teaching of dependent origination, or the teaching of conditionality, the nature of being, and the rebirth linking. So only when only when one who meditates develop insight, knowledge, and wisdoms, then they can understand better the teaching of Dharma. So the Dharma usually defined as the teaching of Four Noble Truths. If one doesn't meditate, one cannot realize the Four Noble Truths. So I wish meditators has this basic understanding, so that they know the importance of mindfulness meditation, insight meditation. Without the practice of insight meditation, one cannot realize the teaching of Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. So I wish all meditators will take interest in the practice of mindfulness meditation, insight meditation, should have strong aspirations to realize the Four Noble Truths through personal experience and attain enlightenment.